Story 1. When I was taking care of my dad, we used to eat hot dogs whenever I was too tired to cook. One night, I got home and, as I was turning on the stove, I remembered we had run out of buns. I double-checked both the fridge and the pantry, but there were none. We were completely out. So, I made clam chowder and noted to get more buns the next day. I got up at 6 the next morning and went downstairs to start breakfast. And there on the countertop, by itself, presented as if a gift, was a brand new unopened bag of hot dog buns. Dad and I had both slept through the night. It seemed that at some point between midnight and 6 a.m., a bag of hot dog buns just materialized on the counter. Story 2. I had my wedding ring fall off my finger while my hand was dangling out of a car window while driving. It was very upsetting to arrive at the hotel and realize it had slipped off. It wasn't in my pockets or in the car anywhere. I checked the floorboards, under the seats, the console, and even the trunk, but figured it was probably lying on the side of the road somewhere along a 60-mile stretch of interstate. I was exhausted after a very stressful day of travel. I checked into my hotel room, pushed my suitcase just inside the door, and passed out on the nearest bed. I didn't even stop in the bathroom or bother to get undressed or take off my shoes. I just laid down on top of the hotel bed and went straight to sleep. The next morning, I woke up and sat up looking at my ring finger, now minus a wedding band. I saw a glint of light on the desk by the window on the far side of the room. I had been so tired the night before that I hadn't even closed the curtains, so the sunlight was pouring in. I got up and walked over to the desk to see what it was. It was my wedding ring sitting by itself on the desktop. I must have stared at it for a solid minute, trying to figure out how it got there. I didn't have it when I came into the room, and until that moment I hadn't even been on that side of the room. I still can't explain how it got there. Story 3. I had just finished replacing all the burned-out bulbs in my rented condominium. I was talking to my wife and said, "But when the one above the stairwell goes out, I'll call maintenance for that because I'm not climbing up there." We then looked at that specific light, and at that moment it burned out. This was about 5 years ago, and we still talk about it. Story 4. A friend was visiting for the weekend, and we were chilling in the basement watching movies and catching up when I ran upstairs to the kitchen to grab a snack. When I was about to head back downstairs, I noticed what I thought was my friend walking up the stairs to the upper floor, so I assumed my friend was going to the bathroom. When I went back down, they were as I left them, chilling on the couch. After explaining, we both, terrified, checked the house. Nobody else was ever found in the house, and there was no sign of a break-in. I still can't explain it. Story 5. I was working as a cashier in a restaurant. The first thing we did after greeting a customer was to get their name to write at the top of their ticket. This customer was particularly chatty, and I was making small talk with her when a strange look came over her face and she became quiet. It was then that I realized I had written her actual name on her ticket without ever asking her for it or being told what it was. It was her first time in that restaurant. Story 6. I was on the periphery of this situation, but it was still strange and unexplained. One morning, I received a call from my wife while I was at work. She was a registered nurse and worked nights, so getting a call when she should have been asleep was unusual. She told me she had a terrible dream, which she couldn't remember clearly, but something awful had happened to a member of my friend Dave's family, and I should call him immediately to check on them. My wife was often the source of strange experiences, so I didn't argue with her and called Dave to inform him. He was a coworker but had the day off, and he assured me that everyone in his family, which included his wife and 2 grandkids he was raising, was just fine. He asked me to thank my wife for her concern. I called my wife back to share the news, but she insisted, "No, something's wrong." The next day, I learned that about half an hour after I called him, Dave received a call from his brother in Florida informing him that his son, the father of the 2 kids Dave was raising, had taken his own life. The son had struggled with addiction but had been clean for quite some time while living with Dave's brother. He had been doing so well that they felt confident leaving him alone while they went on vacation. While they were away, the son relapsed and sold everything he could to buy drugs. On the day his uncle and his wife were due back, he took his own life out of shame. How my wife, who had only met Dave once or twice and had never met any member of his family, Knew something was wrong still baffles me. Story 7. It was near Christmas in 1980, and I was a young teenager in the hospital who would be spending Christmas and New Year's there. It was especially important to my father that he got me whatever I wanted for Christmas. I wanted a memory game called Simon, one of the must-have toys that year. It was nearly impossible to find, but my dad was determined to try. My father was at Toys R Us, staring at the empty shelf where the Simon game should have been in stock. An employee named Matt, as indicated by his name tag, asked if he could assist my dad. My father said he was looking for a Simon game. Matt responded, "Follow me," and led him to a warehouse area where one Simon game was sitting alone. Without saying a word, Matt picked it up, handed it to my dad, and walked away. When my father went to pay, a confused cashier asked, "Where did you get this? It's been sold out for days." My dad explained that Matt had found it for him. The cashier, now more perplexed, said, "We don't have a Matt working here." My dad described Matt and how he had guided him to the game. The cashier began to panic because no one matching Matt's description was employed there. Both my father and I had an especially memorable Christmas that year. 5 Christmases later, I ended up working at that same Toys R Us. Story 8. My sister and I were sitting in the living room reading on a cloudless day around 2 p.m. Suddenly, it felt like I went blind, pitch black, unable to see my hand in front of my face. It lasted a little more than a second, and when my vision returned, I looked over at my sister. She had the same expression I did and asked me what just happened. We have a large bay window in our living room, so I still have no explanation for what occurred. Story 9. I was moving a cut of rail cars over a crossing when a pickup truck ran around the crossing arms and was hit by the rear car. After the truck came to a stop, I saw a man in white get out of the passenger side, followed by the driver. I assumed they were going to switch seats for some reason, perhaps due to being intoxicated or lacking insurance. When the police arrived, I walked to the crossing to provide my information. I inquired if the driver and passenger were okay, and they informed me that there was no passenger, fortunately. That's when I looked at the truck and noticed that the passenger door was completely smashed into the cab where it had been struck. I asked my conductor, who had been observing the movement, if he had seen a passenger, and he confirmed that there was only the driver. Story 10. I saw a glowing magenta orb about 5 feet off the ground. I drove past it, then turned around to see it again, but it was gone. It was really strange. Story 11. When I was about 5, I looked out the window at the woods behind my house and saw a large flat black circle, similar to Vantablack, with a diameter of about 5 feet slowly rolling through the trees. It even slowed down and accelerated like something rolling on uneven ground would. I still have no clue what that was about. I have never had a visual hallucination as clear as that before or since. My mom said it must have been a black bear when I told her about it, but I don't think black bears look much like crisp two-dimensional Vantablack circles. Story 12. I woke up one night to a loud crack. My spouse and I crept out of the bedroom to see that the railing of the stairs had fallen. The metal attachment at the top of the stairs, which held it to the wall, looked like it had been cut through. I don't know how it happened, but we got a new railing. I have never seen anything like that before or since. And yes, the stairs are inside the house. I don't know what could have caused that. It was very loud. Story 13. This is a strange account. I was about to get on the feeder road to a busy highway. As I approached the intersection, I heard a booming male voice in my head saying, "Check your tires before you get on the highway." It was not a voice I recognized, nor was the radio on. I made a hasty U-turn and went straight to a tire specialist I had used in the past. As he checked the front tires, he turned the wheel to reveal a tire so badly worn that the metal wires were exposed. He said, "Good thing you came in here. If you had gone on the highway, that tire would have blown, and you could have been killed." I know this sounds unbelievable, but it happened. Nothing like that has ever occurred to me before or since. No, I am not delusional or on any medication. I did not recognize that voice. It was so shocking that I made that U-turn without even thinking about it. I posted this before, and people suggested angels or some other form of divine intervention. I am not a religious person, nor do I tend to make easy explanations. I am still mystified after 10 years. I also have a UFO story involving my mom and brother, but that's a story for another time. Story 14. One morning, I met a couple on the east side of the state in City A. It was a holiday. They were from City B in the middle of the state, and I lived in City C on the west side. We were all visiting a landmark that day. At the time, we did not discuss any details about where we were visiting from. Several hours later, I was back in City C, about to have the holiday menu at a local restaurant. I looked up and there was that same couple also about to eat. Totally by chance, we had made reservations for the same time at the same restaurant, left the same landmark around the same time, and drove 250 miles to eat at the same restaurant. Story 15. When I was a baby, my mom said something woke her in the middle of the night to check on me. I was hanging by my head outside my crib. I had managed to worm my body out, but my head got stuck. I probably should have been dead. Story 16. I had just gotten married. My friend was driving me home from work. Outside my house, he asked if he could try on my wedding band. I handed it to him and he dropped it in the car with the door closed. We searched the car for over 2 hours and never found it. Story 17. In 2017, my wife, a good friend of ours, and I were walking in a small fishing village in the Northeast. It was a quiet town, but no one was out that night. We were talking as we walked by a dock when my wife leaned over to peer into the water. At that moment, a creature roughly 3 to 4 feet long, with a splayed tail and dragonfly-like features, flew into her face. She screamed, and it disappeared into the darkness. No creature like that exists in Iceland. If we hadn't all seen it, we wouldn't believe it. I still have no idea what to make of it. The next day, a local told us it was a troll, but I think he was joking. Story 18. When I was around 12 years old, our power flickered on and off repeatedly one night. All the lights turned blue, and it produced the strangest electrical screaming sound I have ever heard in my life. It was also occurring at the neighbor's house across the street. This lasted about 20 minutes before everything returned to normal. My grandma was hysterical and threw me into the tub for reasons I am unsure of, while my grandpa went outside to investigate. After what felt like a long time, he came back in and reassured my grandma that it was just a downed power pole down the road, and that people were already there. He sent us off to bed. However, he did not go back to bed. Instead, he sat downstairs watching the door all night with his shotgun, unable to sleep. Several years later, he admitted that he had no idea what that was and that there was no downed pole. Story 19. I was run over by a van as a child. I was dragged for 3 blocks before the van stalled when my leg covered the exhaust pipe, burning a hole in my knee. I survived with mostly burns, including road rash on my face and arms, a hairline fracture in my ankle, and the hole in my knee. The bicycle I was riding somehow bent around my head and kept it from hitting the ground, so I never sustained any head trauma. The chances of all of that happening are astronomically low. Story 20. I heard a voice, not with my ears but not in my head, that said, "You don't have to go home." This occurred as I was walking home, and for some reason, it awakened something in me. I turned around and walked away. I slept on the streets for a couple of weeks before being taken into foster care. That is how I left my abusive family. I decided in that moment not to go home, and that was that. Angel? Higher self? Hallucination? I have no explanation. Story 21. When I was living at home in my parents' house, I was lying on my stomach reading a book in bed. Out of nowhere, I felt a forceful push on my back as if someone had pressed hard on my spine. I was so shocked I jumped up. No one was there. I thought maybe I had a back spasm or something, but I was young and I really do not think I did. Not to mention I had never had back spasms before or since. I believed that house was haunted, but this was the strangest thing that happened there. Another time, my mom took a photo of me with my cell phone in my hand on my way to school one day. I placed the phone down and couldn't find it again. I searched the house looking for that phone. It's almost 20 years later, and it has never turned up. Story 22. The story starts similarly to some other stories here. I was getting ready for school one morning in about fifth grade. I put my socks on my chair, turned around to put on a shirt, and then turned back to the chair. No more socks. It was weird, but whatever, I didn't have time to question it. I grabbed another pair and headed to school. The real strange part comes 5 years later. I'm 15, and there's a big family dinner at my house. My dad decides to get fancy and break out the cloth napkins from our dining room closet that we absolutely never open. One of my cousins unfolds her napkin, which had been neatly folded and untouched since I was probably about 7. My parents don't host many family get-togethers, and sitting inside was one of my missing socks from 5th grade. There's no trace of the other one to this day, and I'm coming up on my 22nd birthday. Story 23. Not me, but my grandparents' story. My grandpa may have taken 5 sick days off in his entire career. My grandma was a stay-at-home wife. After he retired, they both worked at a local flower shop. For about 15 years, he never once took a day off. One day, as they were getting ready for work, he mentioned he was feeling unwell and decided to stay home. She got in the car, started it, had a strange feeling, and then chose to stay home as well since it wasn't like him. As she opened the door, she heard a thud. Turning the corner, she saw my grandpa bleeding from his ears. He had a massive brain aneurysm. She called emergency services, and they just so happened to be about 100 yards away from their house. He underwent immediate surgery at the hospital. The doctor said that if she had been even a minute later and the ambulance hadn't been right there, he would have definitely died. To this day, she can't explain what made her stay home. Whether it was divine intervention or the deep connection they shared after being married for so long. Everything aligned perfectly for him to survive. Story 24. Several years ago, I was having a hard time with life. My mom had recently died, my dog had also passed away, and I may have been going through some sort of midlife crisis. I decided to try meditation to get a grip on everything. But I had no idea how to meditate, so I found a guided meditation online. The video was quite typical. Get comfortable, focus on breathing, and so on. Then, the instructor said, I want you to focus on the memory of your best day. Immediately, I remembered my best day. It was the summer after I graduated from high school. I had no adult plan and made a spur-of-the-moment decision to take a road trip. I had quite a bit of money from graduation gifts. My mom was not on board. She said there was no way she would allow an 18-year-old girl to drive around the United States on her own. We argued about it, and the friend of my stepbrother overheard. He offered to go with me. We talked about it for weeks, and begrudgingly, my mom gave permission. The first few days were awkward. I knew this boy but didn't really know him well. With nothing else to do while driving, we talked about everything. We had so much more in common than I had previously realized. Over the next couple of weeks, we became friends. The specific memory during the guided meditation was of the two of us sitting in a diner, across from each other in a booth. I can perfectly remember how the sunlight reflected off his hair, and in that moment, I felt alive. But here's the thing, that never happened. None of it. I didn't go on a road trip, and I never became friends with that person. When the video asked me to remember my favorite memory, the diner scene popped into my head, and I somehow knew the backstory. It was one of the strangest things I've ever experienced. I know it sounds like I just made up an imaginary story, but it didn't feel like fiction. It was a memory. I wasn't daydreaming. I was remembering. Story 25. I have shared this before, but it is worth mentioning again. I used to work with hospitalized pediatric cancer patients. If we knew they were going to die soon, we would move them into a larger room in the hospital so more of their family and loved ones could be with them. Most of our patients died in that room. One month, we had a 2-year-old boy and an 18-year-old young man die within a week of each other in that room. After they died, another young woman in her late teens moved into that room to spend her final days. When people are dying, they go through periods of being completely lucid to being completely incomprehensible, and everything in between. One of the last things she said before dying was, "Who is that 2-year-old boy in here? And who is that 18-year-old boy in here?" She accurately identified the previous 2 patients who had died in that room just before her. She did not know these patients or that they had died. Story 26. I have a few experiences. The most unexplainable one occurred when I lived in a household of 7. A disembodied woman's voice called people by their names, bothering them until they woke up. My sister and I then heard the voice yell my name while we were both fully awake. I was just resting my eyes, trying to sleep, and she had headphones on without any music playing at the time. Story 27. I lost a ring my mother gave me, though I never took it off. I wore that ring for a decade. It never slipped off and was snug as a bug. It went missing in May 2018. If you see it floating around, please call me. Story 28. It's a sad but bittersweet memory. My grandma, whom I call Mimi, was in hospice. We thought she had a few weeks left, and I planned to see her again the following weekend. It was my first day back at work after the holidays, and suddenly I felt really sick and went home, which is particularly difficult in my job, especially on the first day back. I was standing in my bedroom trying to figure out what to do, feeling restless, when I experienced a profound emotional drop, a deep and all-encompassing sadness. I could hardly breathe. I took a shower because it calms me, and about 5 to 10 minutes later, my mother called to tell me that my Mimi had passed. I just said, I know. Story 29. When I was about 13 years old, I was away for the summer in the south of my country, 300 kilometers from home in a lakeside town. I was about to cross the street with my bicycle, but a van with its side door fully open had the right of way. It drove at a reasonable speed on the winding town road, so I had a good look inside, where I saw 2 men in their mid-20s moving things around. They were entirely unknown to me. However, one of them looked at me, jumped to the opening of the van, and yelled excitedly my name. The van passed me, moved onto a straighter part of the street, picked up speed, and drove off, with the man still looking at me from the door. That was 30 years ago, and I still think about it regularly. Story 30. I hit a patch of black ice in the dark while driving 60 miles per hour down the highway. At the time, I was driving a 1-ton cargo van. It hit the guardrail and flipped. Not only did I walk away without a scratch, the vehicle was drivable and I was only 30 minutes late to work. Story 31. When I was a kid, I was camping in my friend's yard. The outside lights were shining on one wall of the tent. I was talking to my friend, and I swear to this day I saw the shadow of a man walk by, but the light shone through his eyes and mouth as if they were transparent, kind of like if you held a mask up to a light. I jumped and yelled, "What was that?" My friend saw the shadow and unzipped the tent to look, but no one was there. It was too fast for someone to get away even while running. We walked around the yard and house with flashlights but never found anything. That was over 40 years ago, and I can still replay that sight in my mind as if it just happened. Story 32. This just happened last week, and I thought I was going crazy. My husband always uses the white towels, and I use the gold towels. He had taken a shower the night before after doing laundry, so there was only a white towel hanging on one of the hooks close to the curtain. I hopped in the shower without thinking about grabbing a new towel from the cabinet and even had to reach for the white towel to get some water out of my eyes mid-shower. As soon as I turned off the water and opened the curtain, the white towel was on the furthest hook away from me, and a gold towel was hanging on the one closest to me. I asked my husband if he had come in and gotten me a towel, but he hadn't left his computer while I was in the shower. Story 33. I got lost in a lift in the Hilton Zagreb. I was staying on the 5th floor and went up in the lift to use the swimming pool on the 10th floor. Keep in mind that I was wearing only a bikini and the hotel's white toweling robe and slider slippers. I had my swim, which was great. I put my robe and slippers back on, got in the lift, and pressed the button marked 5. I got out when it stopped. There was a large 5 on the wall in the lift lobby, so it was clearly the correct floor. Only it wasn't. It led into a corridor that was an L-shaped dead end. I banged on a few locked doors and shouted hello, with no response. On the 10th floor where I had entered, there were 2 banks of lifts, 2 rows of 3 facing each other. I thought maybe I should have gotten into the opposite bank. I figured it would be easy, so I went back up to the 10th floor, crossed the lobby, and entered one of the opposite lifts. I got out at the 10th floor, but this wasn't where I had entered. There was no opposite bank of lifts. I think there were maybe two or three all in a line. I could see the gym area where I had been swimming, not the pool, but a different area visible through the glazed part of a door, through which I saw a collection of gym machines. There was no one there, no one using them, no staff, compared to the relatively busy reception where I had gone in for the pool. I banged on this door and yelled for a bit, but to no avail. I ventured along a couple of corridors, but they were all dead ends, with locked doors and no answers. I went down to the 5th floor in a different lift, only to find myself back in the dead-end corridor I had come from. I went back up and then down again, trying different lifts each time, but with no difference. The room I came from and was staying in had definitely been on the 5th floor. I eventually went all the way down to level 1, thinking I would just get out at reception and walk up the stairs. However, it was an underground parking garage. I tried each lower level, only to find more and more underground parking garages, eventually arriving at a totally deserted reception of a building that wasn't the one I had been staying in or the Hilton at all. It looked like some kind of office block. So I got out there, walked onto the street, still in my white robe and looking like I had escaped from a psychiatric unit, walked around the corner and back into the Hilton reception from outside, trying to act casual as if I waltzed around Zagreb in my bathrobe all the time. My now ex-husband was wondering why I was taking so long. To this day, I'm not sure whether he believes me about what happened, and I've never been able to tell anyone else what occurred without receiving looks of great skepticism. Story 34. I was sleeping during my night shift break when I heard muffled cries. Suddenly, the clock flew off the wall and shattered into a million pieces beside me. Then something touched my hair. I no longer work night shifts in that unit. Story 35. One time when I had my old diabetic cat, I had just finished going through the morning ritual of measuring his blood sugar, feeding him, and giving him insulin. I always waited until he ate before giving him his shot and was getting ready to head out for work when his portrait, which I had drawn and placed on my wall, fell down all of a sudden. As soon as it happened, I stared at it, and the thought, "My cat is going to go into insulin shock today," came to mind. I am always meticulous with checking his insulin and sugar measurements and double-check to make sure everything was correct. I figured I was just being overly cautious and went to work. As I drove back home after work, my roommate called to tell me my cat was in insulin shock. It turned out that right after I left for work, my cat had thrown up. Thankfully, he was fine and I was able to get his sugar levels up, but that was such a strange experience. Story 36. When I was 2 or 3, I woke up really early one morning while it was still dark. I ran to my parents' bed and fell back asleep. At some point, all 3 of us woke up and one of my parents, though I can't remember which, said they had a strange dream about 3 ghosts who looked like old men with long beards standing at the edge of the bed. I know I also had that dream and so did the other parent. We referred to them as ZZ Top. I was young, but my mom and dad are both no-nonsense people, and they remember me telling them in detail about my dream. None of us felt afraid. We felt protected and peaceful. Story 37. When I was about 8 years old, on a Saturday, I woke up to my dad's voice saying, "Get up." Then, about a minute later, he said again, "Get up now." So I got up, feeling very groggy, and asked, "Yeah, Dad." I walked through the whole house, but nobody was home. My parents owned a bakery, so they were often gone. My then 4-year-old sister and I were usually watched by my older brothers, but they weren't home either. I looked outside and saw my sister across the street talking to much older men sitting in their car. My stomach sank, and I shouted, "Dad wants you. Come in right now." She ran inside, and the car drove away. I've told my parents about this, but they never really say much in response. My brothers still don't believe me. Story 38. When I was 13 years old, I experienced 2 terrible premonitions. I am 46 now, and I have never experienced anything like that since. The first one was when my older brother was headed to a park across town to play volleyball. He asked me and our 2 younger sisters to go with him. For some unknown reason, I did not want to go. I tried my best to convince my sisters as well, but they were young and excited to go to the park. I tried telling my mom that it wasn't a good idea and that he would be too distracted to watch over them, but I just couldn't change her mind. Later that evening, we received a call that my brother was in the hospital and the police were headed to our house with my younger sisters. Apparently, an 80-year-old woman ran a red light and hit the car on the driver's side, and my brother had to be extracted. He ended up being okay, and my sisters were not injured. The second premonition came a few months later. My older brother kept pestering our mom about going to a party. I was sitting on the porch listening when I suddenly felt ice cold and shaky. I chimed in that he had not finished his chores and he shouldn't be allowed to go. I couldn't explain it. I just knew something terrible was going to happen. He snapped at me and told me to mind my own business. He finally convinced my mom and she let him go. A little after midnight, our phone rang, and it was his best friend. He said my brother had been shot 5 times and was in the hospital. Apparently, it was a huge house party and 2 other teenagers were shot as well. I don't recall the exact details, but my brother was chased and shot at, and somehow was able to hide from the shooter. He survived, and later, piecing the events together, the shooter turned himself in the next day and was sentenced to 1 year. I haven't spoken to my brother in years, but every so often I think about these events and how I tried to change the outcomes to no avail. Story 39. I saw an image in my dream right before I woke up. It was all black with the words "The Fab Four" in white. I went to get a coffee and was looking through a Life magazine special edition about the Beatles while waiting, and I saw the exact same image. It was a full page, all black with the Fab Four in white. Story 40. It was probably around 1997 to 1999 in rural South Carolina. My parents had friends over who brought their children too. We had a bonfire, a cookout, and an all-around good time. Around midnight, everyone had left. My brother and I were still up by the bonfire and decided to go over to our trampoline to look at the stars. About 10 minutes later, we saw an object moving slowly across the sky. It was a perfectly clear fall night, making it easy to see. It had no lights or anything. It appeared to be the size of a building and was shaped like 2-letter M as we watched it slowly move across the sky. No lights, no sound, just the silhouette of whatever it was. To this day, we still talk about it and have no idea what we saw. Story 41. My girlfriend at the time in the late 1990s had her grandfather pass away. I was on the other side of the country and had never met her grandparents. I was walking and talking with a friend when I suddenly felt that something was wrong, though I couldn't pinpoint what it was. He noticed the expression on my face and asked me what was wrong. After a brief conversation, I realized it was the time when her grandfather had passed away. I cannot explain how I felt that moment, but I will always swear it's a true story. Story 42. I was asleep with my girlfriend in our bed one night. This was roughly around 3 a.m. from what I recall. Our bedroom door was wide open as usual, facing our living room and kitchen. We were both awakened at the same moment when a voice called out, "I'm good." It was a voice that crackled as the words came out. What stands out to me most is that I could feel the sound vibration hit the bed as it happened. Not like a massive vibration, just imagine someone yelling at you from 5 feet away. You feel it. It immediately startled both of us, and my girlfriend grabbed me, asking if I had heard that. I certainly did. For some reason, I got up and ran to investigate. I turned on all the lights in the house and checked the area down the hallway. Nothing was there. To this day, we still talk about it, and it brings goosebumps to my arms. We slept the rest of that night with all the lights on. Just one of those things. I don't fixate on it. I don't have an explanation for what happened, but it definitely happened, and both of us were there to experience it. I guess in the moment, I thought it was cool that something unexplained happened to me despite it being a rather scary experience. Story 43. One time, I lost my engagement ring and almost my mind. I was going to give one of my dogs a bath, so I took my engagement ring off and put it in my pocket. After the bath, my fiancé asked for my clothes to throw them in with the next load of laundry. I forgot about the ring in my pocket and just tossed in my clothes. A little while later, I noticed I didn't have my ring on and started looking all over, then remembered I had put it in my pocket. I did some research and took apart the washer and dryer but found nothing but some lint, a shoehorn, and change. About 2 months later, my fiancé's father sent me a picture of my missing ring. saying he found it in the visor of his SUV. Neither of us had been in his vehicle that whole time, nor had he paid us a visit, so it was really bizarre that it came back to me that way. I'm super thankful that it showed up, but I'm still at a loss for words. Story 44. When I was in middle school, getting ready in the bathroom, I felt a random urge to look behind me at the door frame. I glanced up in the mirror and then whipped my head around. I can't prove what I saw, and I know our minds like to play tricks on us. I was in a very bad place mentally at the time, but a completely black spirit or shadow was staring at me with red, glowing eyes. It was a hefty size. It looked like a large shadowy figure with red eyes peeking at me from the door frame, and when I turned around, it quickly hid behind the wall of the hallway. I swung the bathroom door closed so fast, and I was so utterly shocked and speechless that I didn't say anything to my parents and just continued my routine. Then I mentioned it to my friends, and they were just as confused. I still cannot explain it, but I remember it vividly. Every time I think about the way this thing stared at me, I literally get mild chills, my heart races, or my eyes water. I swear this isn't some silly horror story. I saw it. The way the outline of its body was wispy like black smoke, and its bright red eyes, the way it swiftly hid behind the wall, it's crazy. I have never experienced anything like that again, even at my lowest point. I don't know what that was, but it still haunts me to this day. I can never forget it. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.